Okay, so a bit of context before we get started, and if you want to skip this, there are chapters. So I didn't love Metro 2033 Redux when I played it back in 2020. I didn't hate it, there were certainly elements that left an impression, I just found it a bit clunky and the English dub is also pretty bad, so I never got invested in the story or the characters. The main reason I played through it was because I wanted to play Exodus and I was curious to see where the story started. Unfortunately, after I finished it, I didn't have much appetite to play Last Light, let alone Exodus, so I gave up on the idea. Fast forward to 2024 and I picked up the complete enhanced edition of Metro Exodus for $9 Australian, and I figured, fuck it, why not, I'll give it a go. Now, it reviewed pretty well back in 2019 on PC and last gen, earning a strong recommendation on OpenCritic and being nominated for a number of awards, including Game of the Year at the 2019 Game Awards. Like with the first two games, Exodus has seen a number of updates, including gameplay improvements, bug fixes, new content, and of course, a big upgrade to the presentation. So in this re-review, I want to discuss how the game has evolved over time. We'll look at the various patches, the new content, both free and paid, the enhanced edition, what it's like to play on current gen hardware, and ultimately if it's worth your time. Exodus's launch was pretty uneventful. PC had a few problems and stability issues, but all things considered, it was a reasonably solid release across every platform. It wasn't without controversy though. Pre-orders were originally available on Steam, but before the game launched it was pulled from the platform, and 4A announced that Epic would have a 1-year exclusivity deal. This was due to a better revenue split through Epic. It's understandable that the studio would want to maximize its revenue potential, but this upset a lot of people, particularly those who had no interest in running the Epic launcher. The other thing people took issue with was that the game shipped with Denuvo's anti-pirate software, which definitely never causes any issues and is beloved by all. Thankfully, both of these hiccups were sorted out post-launch. The game is no longer an Epic exclusive, and Denuvo was removed in May of 2020. These weren't the only updates the game received, of course, not by a long shot. Along with the usual day one patch and some hotfixes, there were several large updates. These mainly addressed bugs and performance issues, but were pretty eclectic, including everything from gameplay changes to localization improvements to better animations and quality of life optimizations like the autosave function. Actually, I'm surprised that there weren't more complaints about the state of the game at launch given the size of the first major update. This thing is goddamn huge. Along with bug fixes, it also included new features such as a New Game Plus, a developer commentary which is available through the New Game Plus, improved controller responsiveness, Ukrainian localization, which is where developer 4A is originally from, as well as mouse and keyboard support for Xbox. Beyond this, there were two more major updates to the base game that coincided with the paid expansions. Of the two kernels was the most substantial, again fixing numerous bugs, improving various gameplay systems, and making the game more accessible. So if it wasn't blatantly obvious, it's definitely worth updating the game because it's better in almost every conceivable way, from how well it runs to how it feels to play and everything in between. Now, in addition to the various patches, 4A shipped an enhanced edition of the game in April of 2021. This was a free, yes, completely free update for anyone who already owned the game on either PC or console. This version of the game significantly upgrades the visuals, so for obvious reasons last-gen consoles missed out. The PS5 and Xbox Series got a 60 frames per second frame rate, and the resolution now scales up to 4K, a big improvement over the 30 FPS and 1080p resolution on last gen. The enhanced edition also added 4K textures, and what I think is the most significant change, ray-traced global illumination. This was applied to literally every light source, from candles on desks to god rays piercing through trees. Every light source in the game is now ray-traced, and the results are pretty spectacular. Next-gen machines gained support for things like 3D audio, and the PS5 got DualSense support too. Unsurprisingly, the newer hardware is able to leverage solid-state hard drives, and load times across the board have been dramatically reduced. Series S got all of the aforementioned improvements except that the resolution is capped at 1080p. For PC, the update was so substantial that it's actually a standalone game, not an update. You'll need a ray tracing capable GPU to run it too. It got the same enhancements that the console ports did, as well as ray trace reflections and DLSS 2.0 support, allowing for higher resolutions and increased performance. So I guess the most important question that needs answering after all of these updates is, how does it play? According to most reports, performance and stability on PC and current-gen consoles is solid, and it has a very positive rating on Steam, which is always a good sign. I personally only came across one crash during my time with the game, and this was in one of the expansions, but I think that's pretty good considering the 23 hours I spent with it on PS5. Occasional jank is still here, especially in the second half of the game. It's mostly of the visual variety, and ranges from textures and geometry popping in and out of view, odd lighting effects, and enemies clipping through surfaces. You'll also come across some weird scripting issues. Like, at one point I managed to resurrect a dead NPC, and although this was kind of hilarious, these issues weren't common enough or bad enough to ruin my experience. But of course, your mileage may vary. I do want to stress that this is a much more stable experience than when I played Metro 2033 Redux on PS5, and in spite of a few technical issues, it remains a big and beautiful game. So yeah, this game is still a looker, and constantly serves up incredible vistas and well-designed environmental storytelling. Haptics have been put to good use on the PS5, especially for things like charging batteries and weapons. They add a tangible weight to these actions and provide feedback that perfectly fits in with the diegetic approach the game is going for. All of the game's systems feel more refined too. So where I thought things like the gunplay and weapon customization were simply serviceable in 2033, they feel satisfying and fun here. I want to call out the New Game Plus as well, because this is one of the most feature-rich modes of its kind that I've seen. You can modify a number of settings to make the game easier or harder. For example, you can turn off saving in between missions, you can give enemies armor, and you can increase the number of radiation zones. There are of course some elements that don't hold up so well, and are especially obvious given the quality of the rest of the game's visuals. Character models are impressive, but are let down by some wooden animations, choppy tweening, and some facial animations that are giving off some serious Johnny Cab vibes. The voice acting is better than in the previous games, but it's still kind of stilted, and keeping Artyom as a silent protagonist except during loading screens was a poor choice given how often NPCs ask him questions. In general though, it transcends these obvious flaws with satisfying exploration, tight combat, and a story that hits pretty hard. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the expansions here, and this will contain spoilers for the base game. As usual, I won't spoil the DLC, but if you want to skip ahead to my recommendation, now is the time. The first expansion is called The Two Colonels. You play as Colonel Klebanov, the father of Kirill, the boy you meet in the last chapter of the main game. It explains what happened at Novosibirsk, as well as what Colonel Miller got up to while you were getting the green stuff. It's pretty dark in tone. I mean, the whole game is dark, but this is an especially bleak chapter, mainly because you kind of know how it ends before it starts. It's short, but it fills in an interesting side story that's only alluded to in the main campaign. Klebnikov talks in this one too, so not only do I think the storytelling is stronger, I felt a much better connection with him than I did with Artyom. It introduces a new weapon, the flamethrower, which is put to good use in the 2 to 3 hours it takes to complete the DLC. Although there are some repeated areas, it mostly takes place in new locations. There aren't any new enemy types, but the flamethrower breathes some freshness into the combat, especially in the sections where you have to take on a ton of enemies at once. I would recommend giving this one a go for the story alone. It might be brief, but you definitely get bang for your buck. The second expansion is called Sam's Story and focuses on, wait for it, Sam, the American from the campaign. This takes place directly after the campaign, but it's not a continuation of the story. It follows Sam's journey to Vladivostok as he tries to return back to the US to see his father. This is a substantially larger expansion than the Two Colonels. There's a new location to explore, new gadgets, new weapons to customize, new hazards, and a new mode of transport. You can probably finish it in about 6 hours if you rush through it, but there's quite a lot of sightseeing here for those who want to take their time. Vladivostok is an interesting location with heaps of secrets to discover, so getting distracted is easy, and this expansion feels really dense in terms of things to see and do. The map is pretty big, not as large as the Caspian area from the campaign, but I'd say that the number of side activities is about the same. From a story point of view, I thought this was less interesting than the Two Colonels because it doesn't really connect to the main campaign. Sure, Sam is in the campaign, but it doesn't expand on the central story in any meaningful way. Seeing the world through his eyes is a great way to reframe the world of Metro though, and I did enjoy the additional world building. From a gameplay point of view, I think it's a bit faster paced than the campaign, and I think this is the area where it really delivers. The main campaign can drag on a bit in some sections, even if you're just doing the mainline quests, and I like that there was always something to explore or something to shoot at here. Now, as good as these expansions are, and they are good, I don't think they're essential. The main campaign is so big and so full of supplementary content like side quests and open world distractions that I can't imagine you'd be left feeling unfulfilled by the time the credits roll. In saying that, given that these expansions regularly get absurd discounts, I reckon they're a pretty sweet deal for anyone looking to stay in the world of Metro as long as possible.
Who is that? That Scheitel is there! Why does it happen?
Although Metro Exodus is the biggest and by most accounts the best Metro game to date, it's still very much a Metro game. If you were hoping for some kind of radical departure in its gameplay or storytelling, then I'm sorry to say that you're not going to get that. For better or worse, this is a continuation of the series in almost every way. Now, in saying that, it does distinguish itself from the previous two entries. It's easily the best looking game in the series, and the decision to move it out of the confines of the Metro works incredibly well with the sandbox style of gameplay. Some long-standing issues with the series continue to endure, such as bugs and a low-quality English dub, but overall, this is Metro in its Super Saiyan form, and you can finally call me a Metro fan.